They tried to burn the photograph. That's the first thing you need to understand. Not just throw it away or lock it in some forgotten archive. They wanted it gone, permanently erased from history. But here you are looking at it now, a relic that refused to disappear, a truth someone desperately wanted buried. The photograph from Cannon Street Hospital, 1897, appears ordinary at first glance. A group of medical professionals posed stiffly, as was custom for the era. 8 doctors in their dark suits, 12 nurses in starched white uniforms, all arranged in careful rows before the brick facade of the newly established institution. It should have been nothing more than a historical curiosity, a sepia-toned snapshot preserving a moment long past. But look closer at the figure standing in the back row, third from the right. Look at where her head should be. There is something unnatural about the absence. Not the blurry distortion of damaged film, not the faded deterioration of age. This is a perfect void, a precise nothingness that defies explanation. The crisp lines of the hospital wall, visible through what should be solid flesh. The unsettling perfection of the uniform below, each fold and button rendered in exquisite detail, ending in a clean line where neck should meet jaw. The other figures in the photograph stand oblivious, their expressions solemn, unaware of the impossibility among them. Did none of them notice? Or did they choose not to see what stood beside them that spring day, when Cannon Street Hospital commemorated its opening? The official records from Cannon Street Hospital claim the photograph was merely damaged, a flaw in the developing process that created an unfortunate blur where Nurse Eleanor Harwick's face should have been. A reasonable explanation that satisfied inquiries for nearly 30 years, but in 1926, when the hospital's original wing was scheduled for demolition, workers discovered something sealed within the walls of the East Corridor. Eleanor Harwick's personal diary, wrapped in waxed cloth and hidden inside a cavity behind the plaster. Its pages told a very different story about what really happened in those early days, and why her image in that photograph appears so unnaturally disturbing. The diary itself is an artifact worth studying. Bound in faded blue leather, its pages yellowed but remarkably preserved thanks to Eleanor's careful wrapping. The handwriting begins, as you might expect from a well-educated medical professional of the late 19th century, precise, measured, with the confident flourishes of someone trained in proper penmanship. But as you move through the entries, the script transforms, becoming increasingly urgent, the pressure of the pen leaving deeper impressions on the paper, words occasionally underlined 3-4 times for emphasis. In places, the ink is smudged, as if the pages were handled with trembling, damp hands. These physical details alone tell a story of deterioration, of a mind under increasing strain. But it's the content of those pages that truly chills the blood. Eleanor began her nursing career with impeccable credentials. Trained at Philadelphia General, she arrived at Cannon Street with glowing recommendations and a reputation for exceptional competence. Her diary entries from January 1897 reflect an ambitious young woman eager to establish herself at the newly opened hospital. "The facilities here are remarkable," she wrote, "modern in every respect, with electric illumination throughout, and the most advanced surgical theater I have yet encountered. Dr. Westcott has assured me my skills will be put to good use." But by February, the tone of her writing changes dramatically. The neat, measured handwriting becomes increasingly agitated. Entries appear at unusual hours, 3:17 a.m., 2:44 a.m., times when she should have been sleeping between shifts. She begins documenting strange occurrences in the hospital's East Wing, where terminal patients were housed. The first incident seems minor in isolation. February 9th, peculiar incident today. Mrs. Thornton's medication was administered before I arrived for my shift, though no other nurse was assigned to her care. Dr. Mills suggested I simply forgot having done it myself earlier. I know this to be impossible, as I had only just prepared the dosage from the dispensary. I have checked the log, and no other staff signed for morphine withdrawal during the preceding hours. A simple mistake, perhaps. A clerical error, or a lapse in memory during a demanding shift. But it was only the beginning. I am not imagining it, she wrote on February 23rd. Twice now I have heard the distinct sound of footsteps in the corridor when no one was there. Tonight, Mrs. Ellison in room 4 claimed a nurse had already administered her evening morphine, though I was the only one assigned to her care, and I had just arrived for my shift. By March, Eleanor was recording multiple incidents per week. Medical instruments rearranged when no one had entered the supply room, patients reporting conversations with staff members who weren't on duty, and most disturbingly, a recurring figure glimpsed in the hallway mirror, a nurse in an outdated uniform that predated the hospital itself. March 7th, patient in room 12 refuses to allow me to change his bandages, claims, the other nurse, already did so at dawn. When I explained no nurse had been assigned to him until my arrival at 7 a.m., he became agitated, insisting a woman in one of those old-fashioned uniforms with the long apron and funny cap had attended to him for nearly half an hour. His dressings were indeed freshly changed, though I can find no record of who might have done this. The wound appears properly cleaned and dressed according to Dr. Westcott's instructions. I would suspect another staff member simply forgot to record their work, but no one on duty matches the patient's description. March 13th. It happened again. This time I nearly collided with her. Turning the corner near the linen storage, I distinctly felt a cold presence pass through me. For a moment, I could not catch my breath, as if the air itself had solidified in my lungs. When I recovered, I noticed the supply cabinet had been rearranged. All the rolled bandages, which I had organized by size just hours earlier, had been restored to the old categorization system that was used before the hospital standardized its protocols. No one else has keys to this cabinet, except head nurse Sullivan, who has been away with influenza these past 3 days. What makes Eleanor's account particularly compelling is her initial skepticism. She was not a woman given to superstition or flights of fancy. Her diary shows methodical attempts to identify rational explanations, checking staff schedules, examining door locks, even calculating if drafts from the ventilation system could account for the movement of objects. "I am a woman of science," she insisted in one entry, "and there must be a logical explanation for these events. I will find it." But the logical explanation, when it finally came, was far more horrifying than any ghost story. Eleanor's investigative methodology reveals her intelligence and thoroughness. She began by interviewing other staff members, carefully documenting their experiences without revealing her suspicions. Night orderly Peter Simmons reported unusual cold spots in the east corridor. Scullery maid Hannah Winters admitted avoiding certain rooms when working late, claiming they made her feel watched. Head surgeon Dr. Mills mentioned patient reports of being tended by a nurse no one could identify, dismissing it as the confused ramblings of minds addled by pain and medication. Eleanor mapped these incidents, creating a careful floor plan of the hospital, with each occurrence marked in red ink. The resulting pattern was unmistakable, all centered around the east wing, with the highest concentration in the corridor outside rooms 8 through 14. On April 3rd, she conducted an experiment, placing small objects, a pencil, a spool of thread, a paperclip, in precise positions throughout the east wing, photographing their placement and checking them at hourly intervals throughout her shift. By morning, 6 of the 14 items had moved, some by mere inches, others relocated entirely to different rooms. No other staff had entered the areas according to the night log, and Eleanor herself had remained at the nurse's station, completing paperwork where she could be observed by the night watchman. "I can no longer deny the evidence of my senses," she wrote. "Something inhabits this hospital, something unseen that moves with purpose and intent." On April 17th, Eleanor documented her discovery of old architectural plans in the hospital archives. The current building had been constructed on the site of a smaller private sanatorium that burned down in 1871. Further research revealed that the fire had claimed the lives of 6 patients and 1 nurse, a woman named Margaret Schaefer, who had heroically returned to the burning building to rescue her patients. According to newspaper accounts Eleanor uncovered, Nurse Schaefer's body was found in the east corridor, decapitated by a falling support beam as the structure collapsed. The archive room where Eleanor made this discovery has its own story to tell. Located in the hospital's basement, it housed the institution's growing collection of medical records, administrative documents, and architectural plans. Eleanor's diary describes the room in vivid detail. The perpetual dampness of the stone walls, the single electric bulb that cast long shadows between the tall shelving units, the peculiar stillness of the air. She had been granted access by the hospital administrator, Dr. Lawrence Harding, who saw no harm in allowing an ambitious young nurse to research the institution's history. What he couldn't have known was that Eleanor was searching for something specific. Validation of the pattern she'd discovered, confirmation that her experiences weren't merely the product of an overactive imagination. The documents Eleanor found that day were supposed to have been destroyed. Filed in a water-damaged box labeled Sanatorium Incident, Official Inquest, they contained the complete record of the 1871 fire investigation, including witness statements, architectural assessments, and most crucially, detailed accounts of the victims' conditions. The report on Margaret Schaefer's remains was particularly graphic, describing how the fallen beam had severed her head, with such force that it was found some 20 feet from her body, badly burned but with facial features still identifiable, eyes open and frozen in an expression that the coroner described as acute awareness. More disturbing was the notation that her body had been discovered not sprawled in death but kneeling, as if she had continued attempting to move forward even after the catastrophic injury, propelled by some impossible determination. "I cannot ignore the implications," Eleanor wrote. "The manifestations are centered precisely where Margaret Schaefer died. The uniform described by patients matches illustrations from that period. But why now? What has awakened her after 26 years of silence?" The answer came when Eleanor discovered something disturbing during renovations to expand the East Wing. Workers had uncovered human remains, a partial skeleton missing its skull, hastily buried beneath what would have been the original foundation. Eleanor's diary suggests that in the chaos following the fire, with multiple bodies recovered, Margaret Schaefer had been misidentified, and someone else had been buried under her name in the cemetery. Eleanor's discovery of the remains occurred on April 22nd, a date she marked in her diary with a thick black border, a visual signal of its significance. She had been monitoring the renovation work during her shifts, drawn to the East Wing excavation by an instinct she couldn't articulate. The workers had been digging near the foundation to install new drainage pipes when their shovels struck something solid. Eleanor's diary captures the moment with chilling precision. Foreman Williams called for a halt when they uncovered what he initially thought was an old wooden box. As they cleared away more soil, it became apparent they had found a coffin. Crude, unmarked, without proper handles or fittings. The wood had partially rotted away, revealing glimpses of what lay inside. I was the only medical staff present when they opened it fully. The skeletal remains were clearly female, judging by the pelvic structure, and clothed in the degraded remnants of what could only be a nurse's uniform from the previous decade. The skull was absent, the spinal column ending abruptly at the highest vertebra. Even as a medical professional accustomed to human anatomy, I found myself chilled by the implication that someone had buried her in haste, without her head, outside of consecrated ground. "They built over her," Eleanor wrote in a shaking hand. "They simply built over her without proper burial, without dignity or care. No wonder she cannot rest." What follows in the diary is Eleanor's detailed account of her attempts to right this historical wrong. Working in secret, she petitioned the hospital board to allow a proper reburial, but her requests were denied. The administration was concerned about potential scandal and the expense of delaying construction. Eleanor's entries become increasingly desperate as her superiors dismissed her concerns and even threatened her position if she continued, spreading superstitious nonsense among the patients. The board meeting where Eleanor presented her findings is described in painful detail. Held on May 3rd in the hospital's administrative wing, the gathering included all 7 board members led by Chairman Percival Blackwood, a wealthy industrialist whose family had provided the primary funding for Cannon Street's construction. Eleanor had prepared meticulously, bringing copies of the historical records, her documented incidents, and statements from 3 patients who had encountered the mysterious nurse. Her diary describes how, as she spoke, the men exchanged glances ranging from amusement to outright contempt. Dr. Harding interrupted her presentation halfway through, calling it hysterical nonsense unbefitting a woman of medical training. Chairman Blackwood suggested that perhaps Eleanor was overworked and in need of rest. Only Dr. James Kendrick, the chief surgeon, showed any sympathy, asking thoughtful questions about the remains and the historical records. "They have denied everything," Eleanor wrote that night, her handwriting so forceful it nearly tore through the page. "Blackwood claims the bones are merely animal remains mistaken for human. Dr. Mills suggested I am suffering from female hysteria brought on by the stresses of nursing work. They have ordered the construction to continue without delay, the remains to be disposed of without ceremony, and instructed me to rest for 3 days without pay, a punishment disguised as concern." Only Dr. Kendrick spoke in my defense, but he was quickly silenced. "They fear scandal above all, the possibility that word might spread that Cannon Street is built on an improper burial site. The institutional reputation matters more to them than proper respect for the dead." Following the board meeting, Eleanor's diary entries show her taking matters into her own hands. Unable to secure official sanction for a proper burial, she began performing small rituals of respect and remembrance in the East Wing. She brought fresh flowers to room 11, closest to where Margaret Schaefer died. She researched proper burial prayers and recited them quietly during her night shifts. Most significantly, she began speaking directly to Margaret's spirit, acknowledging her presence and promising to help her find peace. "I no longer fear her," Eleanor wrote on May 8th. "She was a nurse, as I am. She died trying to save her patients. Whatever keeps her bound to this place, it is not malice, but injustice. She deserves to be remembered properly, not erased from history, and buried like refuse beneath the foundation." As Eleanor's attempts to honor Margaret's memory continued, the manifestations increased in both frequency and intensity. The temperature fluctuations in the East Wing became so severe that instruments sometimes frosted over. Patients reported being visited by a nurse who administered medication but left no footprints in the talcum powder Eleanor had secretly spread across doorways. Most disturbing were the whispers heard by multiple staff members, a woman's voice repeating the same phrases, "They don't remember," and "make them see." The photograph that has drawn your attention was taken on May 15, 1897, a celebration of the hospital's successful first 6 months of operation. Eleanor's diary entry from that day is unnervingly brief. "She was there with us today, standing among the living, visible only to me. No one else seemed to notice how the air around her grew cold, how the light bent wrongly. She has begun to follow me now. I feel her presence, even as I write these words. God help me, I know what she wants." The photographic session itself is documented in the hospital's administrative records, a seemingly joyous occasion meant to commemorate Cannon Street's early success and generate publicity for future funding. All staff on duty were required to participate, assembling at precisely 2 p.m. in front of the main entrance. The hospital had hired Roderick Fleming, one of Philadelphia's premier portrait photographers, known for his work with the city's elite. Fleming's assistant would later provide a statement that offers another perspective on that day, noting that his employer had complained about unusual equipment failures, an unexplained crack in one lens, persistent cold spots that fogged the glass plate negatives, and most peculiarly, a moment when the black cloth covering the camera lifted as if caught by a breeze, though the air was perfectly still. Eleanor's placement in the back row was deliberate, according to her diary. She had been scheduled for the front row alongside other senior nursing staff, but, at the last moment, had exchanged positions with Nurse Collins, claiming a headache and sensitivity to the bright spring sunlight. In reality, as she confided to her diary, "I could feel Margaret standing directly behind my assigned spot. No one else could see her, but I knew with certainty that she would be there in the photograph if I stood where they wanted me. I cannot explain how I knew this, only that I did with absolute clarity. So I moved to where she was already standing, thinking perhaps my physical presence would prevent her from appearing in the image. I was wrong. She did not stand beside me as I expected. She stood within me. 3 days after the photograph was taken, Nurse Eleanor Harwick disappeared. The official report states she resigned her position without notice and left no forwarding address. Her belongings remained in her quarters at the nurse's residence. No family members ever reported her missing. Records show she was an orphan with no close relatives. She simply vanished. Another young woman lost to history. Unremarkable, except for the photographic anomaly that would later become the subject of whispered speculation. The night of Eleanor's disappearance was documented by night watchman Thomas Sullivan, whose log notes a disturbance in the East Wing shortly after midnight. Heard strange noises from vicinity of room 11. Female voice possibly singing or chanting. Investigated but found no one present. Cold spot in hallway so severe my breath was visible. Returned to rounds after securing area. Sullivan's log makes no mention of seeing Eleanor, though she was scheduled for the night shift. The next entry in the log, timed at 4:17 a.m., simply notes, Nurse Harwick has not appeared for scheduled medication distribution. Nurse Peterson notified and covering her duties. But her diary tells us what really happened. The final entries become increasingly frantic, describing Margaret Schaefer's spirit growing more aggressive, appearing not just to patients but manifesting physically in ways Eleanor could no longer rationalize away. The last entry, dated May 19th at 2:13 a.m., contains just one sentence. She wants me to help them remember. The diary ends there, mid-page, as if Eleanor had been interrupted while writing. What interrupted her? The diary doesn't say, but a separate account provides a chilling possibility. In 1945, during the hospital's renovation to accommodate returning war veterans, an elderly maintenance worker named Frederick Wilson shared a story with a young medical student. Wilson had been working as a janitor at Cannon Street on the night Eleanor vanished. Unable to sleep, he had decided to start his shift early, arriving at the hospital shortly after 2 a.m. As he approached the East Wing, he heard a woman's voice from inside room 11. Thinking a patient needed assistance, he looked through the door's small window. What he saw kept him silent for nearly 50 years. There were 2 women in the room, he reportedly told the medical student. One was Nurse Harwick. I recognized her uniform and the way she wore her hair. She was writing in a book at the bedside table. The other woman stood behind her, wearing an old-fashioned nurse's uniform I didn't recognize. But her head, sir, she didn't have one. Just empty air where it should have been. As I watched, this headless woman placed her hands on Nurse Harwick's shoulders. Nurse Harwick went very still, then slowly reached up and touched her own neck like she was checking for something. That's when I ran. Ran all the way to the boiler room and didn't come out till sunrise. When I finally got the courage to return to my duties, room 11 was empty. The bed was made, unused. Nurse Harwick was gone. Never saw her again. Never told anyone what I saw until now. Wilson's account, dismissed as the ramblings of an old man, was recorded only as a curiosity in the medical student's journal. But it aligns perfectly with the final pages of Eleanor's diary, which describe Margaret's increasing physicality and Eleanor's growing awareness of what the spirit wanted from her. She follows me everywhere now, Eleanor wrote on May 17th. I feel her cold presence at my shoulder during rounds, hear her footsteps matching mine in the corridor. Today, as I administered medication to Mr. Reynolds, I caught her reflection in the window glass, standing where my own should have been. But in the reflection where my head should have been, there was nothing, just empty space, a perfect absence. When I turned in shock, she was gone, but I felt her satisfaction. She is showing me something, preparing me for something. I believe I finally understand what she wants. When hospital administration commissioned a review of the photograph weeks later, they initially planned to have it retaken due to the quote, unfortunate flaw obscuring Eleanor's face. But upon closer examination, they noticed something that wasn't immediately apparent. Eleanor's image in the photograph wasn't merely blurred or damaged. Where her head should have been was an empty space, perfectly clear, through which the hospital wall behind her was visible. While the rest of her body appeared solid, her head was simply absent, as if she had been photographed that way, standing in formation, completely decapitated yet somehow still alive. The photographer, Roderick Fleming, was called to explain the anomaly. His written statement, preserved in the hospital records, expresses complete bewilderment. "I have been practicing the photographic arts for 22 years and have never encountered such an aberration." The glass plate negative shows the same peculiarity as the prints, a perfect absence where the young woman's head should be. This is not a flaw in development or exposure. It is as if that specific area refused to register any impression whatsoever, while the surrounding details remain perfectly clear. I cannot explain it in any rational terms, and frankly, the negative itself disturbs me greatly. There is something unnatural about it. My assistant refuses to handle it directly. The hospital's response was swift and comprehensive. All copies of the photograph were ordered destroyed. Eleanor's employment records were altered to suggest she had never worked at Cannon Street. Patients who asked about her were told they were confused, mistaking her for another nurse. Within months, her existence had been officially erased, but the photograph you're looking at now survived, secretly preserved by Dr. James Kendrick, the hospital's chief surgeon, who had taken a personal interest in Eleanor's claims about Margaret Schaefer. Kendrick's involvement offers another layer to this mystery. As the only board member who showed any sympathy for Eleanor's concerns, he had quietly begun his own investigation into the hospital's history. His personal papers, discovered alongside the photograph, include correspondence with historical societies, architectural firms involved in the original sanatorium, and relatives of Margaret Schaefer. These investigations confirmed much of what Eleanor had discovered: the original sanatorium fire, Margaret's heroic death, and most significantly, discrepancies in the burial records that suggested a body was indeed missing from the official cemetery. While the hospital administration worked to erase all evidence of both Eleanor and the disturbing events, Kendrick methodically gathered information. He interviewed staff members who had worked with Eleanor, collecting their observations before memories could be rewritten by the official narrative. He secured a copy of the photograph before all prints were destroyed. Most importantly, he began monitoring the East Wing himself, spending long hours there under the pretense of checking on critical patients. His notes document the same phenomena Eleanor had reported: cold spots, whispering voices, and brief glimpses of a nurse who shouldn't have been there. Kendrick kept detailed notes about the events following Eleanor's disappearance. He documented how, in the months after she vanished, the hospital experienced an unusually high number of equipment failures in the surgical theater, resulting in the deaths of 3 prominent physicians, all of whom had voted against investigating the remains found in the East Wing. He described how, during renovation work in 1898, workers finally discovered a sealed chamber beneath the East Corridor floor, containing the complete skeletal remains of a woman, minus her skull, clutching a tarnished nurse's identification pin bearing the name M. Schaefer. The deaths of the 3 physicians deserve closer examination. Dr. Miles Westcott, who had dismissed Eleanor's concerns as female hysteria, was the first to die in August 1897. During a routine appendectomy, the electric lighting in the surgical theater inexplicably failed. In the momentary darkness, Westcott somehow sliced through his own carotid artery with a scalpel. By the time the backup gas lamps were lit, he had already lost too much blood to save. 2 weeks later, Dr. Calvin Mills died of sepsis after a minor cut on his hand became mysteriously infected. The pattern went unnoticed until Chairman Blackwood himself collapsed during a board meeting in November, clutching his throat and gasping that someone was strangling him, though no one was near him. The autopsy revealed a cerebral hemorrhage, but nurses who prepared his body noted unusual bruising around his neck in the distinct pattern of fingertips. Kendrick's notes connect these deaths explicitly to their opposition to investigating Margaret Schaefer's remains. "It cannot be coincidence," he wrote, "that the 3 most vocal opponents of providing proper burial to the remains have died under such unusual circumstances, each involving trauma to the neck or throat. It is as if whatever force haunts this hospital is methodically eliminating those who stood in the way of its justice. I alone supported Miss Harwick's petition, and I alone among the board remain unharmed." The discovery of Margaret Schaefer's complete remains in 1898 occurred during the final phase of the East Wing expansion. Workers breaking through the old foundation wall to connect new drainage pipes discovered a small, sealed chamber that had been deliberately walled off from the main structure. Kendrick, who by then had convinced the new hospital administrator to consult him on any unusual findings during construction, was immediately called to the scene. His detailed description of the chamber reveals the care with which Margaret's remains had been concealed. The space measured approximately 3 feet by 5 feet, he wrote, lined with brick and sealed with mortar of a different composition than the surrounding foundation, suggesting it was created at a different time, likely after the main structure was completed. The skeletal remains were arranged not in the chaotic manner of a hasty burial, but with deliberate care, lying supine, arms crossed over the chest, surrounded by the deteriorated fabric of a nurse's uniform. The skull was absent, as expected, but what caught my attention was the identification pin still attached to the collar, tarnished but clearly engraved with Min Schaefer and the sanatorium's insignia. Most disturbing was the discovery of a small leather-bound volume beneath the skeletal hands, preserved in a sealed metal box. The journal of Margaret Schaefer herself, documenting the final days of the sanatorium before the fire. Margaret's journal, described in Kendrick's notes but sadly lost in subsequent years, apparently contained evidence of medical malpractice at the original sanatorium, experimental treatments performed on patients without consent, falsified death certificates, and financial fraud. According to Kendrick, Margaret had discovered these abuses and was preparing to report them to authorities when the fire occurred. The journal suggested the fire itself might not have been accidental but deliberate, an attempt to destroy evidence and silence Margaret before she could expose the truth. Most disturbing of all, Kendrick's notes describe a pattern he alone seemed to notice. In the years following Eleanor's disappearance, 7 nurses who worked at Cannon Street reported seeing the same thing, a nurse in an outdated uniform, walking the East Corridor at night. But in their descriptions, this apparition wasn't Margaret Schaefer. It was Eleanor Harwick, instantly recognizable save for one detail. Where her head should have been, there was nothing at all. The first sighting occurred just 2 months after Eleanor's disappearance. Nurse Sarah Collins, who had exchanged places with Eleanor in the photograph, reported encountering her while doing late rounds in the East Wing. I called out to her, thinking she had returned to her duties, Collins told Kendrick. She was standing at the far end of the corridor, her back to me, perfectly still. When she didn't respond, I approached, thinking perhaps she hadn't heard me. As I drew closer, she slowly turned, and I saw nothing where her face should have been. Just empty air, through which I could see the wall behind her. I fainted from shock, and when I was revived by Dr. Peterson, there was no one else present in the corridor. Similar accounts followed over the next 2 years. Night orderly Michael Foster reported seeing a headless nurse arranging flowers in room 11, the blooms seemingly suspended in midair as they passed through the empty space where her hands manipulated them. Head nurse Sullivan, who had been particularly dismissive of Eleanor's concerns while she was alive, reported waking in the night to find a figure standing at the foot of her bed in the nurses' quarters, a figure she recognized as Eleanor despite the absence of a head. Most chillingly, a patient in the terminal ward claimed that a nurse without a head had sat with him through the night, holding his hand and somehow, despite having no mouth to speak with, humming softly to ease his pain. Kendrick meticulously documented each sighting, noting that they all shared key elements. The figure was always clearly recognizable as Eleanor Harwick by her distinctive uniform and physical build. The absence of a head was described as a clean void rather than a wound or injury, and most significantly, each encounter left the witness with the same overwhelming impression. She wants us to remember something important. The remains discovered under the East Corridor were finally given a proper Christian burial in 1899, in a ceremony attended only by Kendrick and the hospital chaplain. Margaret Schaefer's name was added to the memorial for those who died in the 1871 fire. After this, Kendrick reported, the sightings of Eleanor ceased. For a time, it seemed the hospital's dark chapter had closed. But you wouldn't be looking at this photograph now if that were truly the case. The quiet period following Margaret's proper burial lasted nearly 20 years. Cannon Street Hospital continued its operations without reported incidents. The East Wing was completed, and as older staff retired or transferred, the stories of Eleanor Harwick and the headless nurse faded into institutional folklore, dismissed by new administrators as superstitious nonsense from a less enlightened time. Kendrick himself remained at the hospital until his retirement in 1921, continuing to document the hospital's history, but finding nothing further to add to the Harwick-Schaefer file, as he had come to call it. But in 1919, as the hospital struggled with the devastating influenza pandemic, something changed. With wards overflowing and staff working beyond exhaustion, the barriers between worlds perhaps grew thinner. A young orderly, named Thomas Green, who had no knowledge of the hospital's haunted history, reported encountering two nurses in the East Wing during the night shift, one in a modern uniform, the other in an antiquated style he didn't recognize. Neither had heads. They were kneeling beside the bed of a dying patient, their hands joined as if in prayer. When Green called out in shock, they turned toward him in unison, revealing not empty space where their heads should have been, but faint, translucent impressions of faces, one belonging to a young woman he didn't recognize, the other to a much older woman with severe features. Green's account might have been dismissed as the hallucination of an overworked mind, except for what happened next. The patient, who had been expected to die before morning, made a complete recovery, his fever breaking within hours of Green's encounter with the headless nurses. When the patient was well enough to speak, he reported a vivid dream in which two nurses had visited him, their faces obscured by brilliant light. They had placed their hands on his chest and told him it wasn't his time yet, that he was needed to bear witness to the truth. In 1926, when Kendrick was an old man nearing death, he arranged for both the photograph and his personal papers to be sealed in the hospital archives, with instructions that they remain undisturbed for 50 years. By the time they were discovered in 1976, Cannon Street Hospital had been demolished, replaced by a modern medical center with no institutional memory of the events that had transpired there. The photograph and documents were catalogued without fanfare, filed away as historical curiosities without anyone recognizing their significance. Kendrick's final note, attached to the sealed package, reveals his motivation for preserving these records. "I am an old man now, and soon to face whatever lies beyond this life. I have witnessed things at Cannon Street that defy rational explanation, things that have tested my scientific understanding of the world. I do not know why Eleanor Harwick and Margaret Schaefer remain bound to this place, why they appear as they do, or what truth they are so determined to preserve. I have done what I could to honor their memory and provide proper respect for the dead. Perhaps that is enough, but I preserve these records and this disturbing photograph in case it is not, in case future generations need to understand what happened here. I have come to believe that some truths refuse to remain buried, no matter how deeply we try to enter them. Some injustices echo through time until they find witnesses willing to acknowledge them. If you are reading this, you have become part of that chain of witnesses. What you do with this knowledge is your choice. But remember, they are still watching, still waiting, still determined to be remembered." The archivist who discovered Kendrick's package in 1976, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, found herself unexpectedly drawn to the material. What began as routine cataloging became a personal research project that consumed her free time for months. She tracked down hospital records, cross-referenced architectural plans, even located distant relatives of both Eleanor Harwick and Margaret Schaefer. Her research largely confirmed Kendrick's accounts, adding context and historical details he couldn't have known. But as her investigation deepened, Chen reported experiencing unsettling phenomena, cold spots in her office, the sensation of being watched, and most disturbingly, recurring dreams of walking down a hospital corridor toward two figures without heads. Chen's research notes, preserved in the university where she later taught medical history, describe how she eventually traveled to the site where Cannon Street Hospital once stood. The modern medical center, built on its foundations, had retained nothing of the original structure except for a single decorative cornerstone embedded in the lobby wall. As she stood studying this lone artifact, a nursing student approached her, asking if she was looking for the two nurses. Startled, Chen asked what the student meant. "Oh, it's just a story the night staff tells," the student explained. Supposedly there are two nurses who still do rounds in the East Wing, the original East Wing that would have been underground now. Maintenance guys refuse to go down to the old foundation level alone after midnight. They say the nurses have no heads, but still somehow know when patients need help. It's just a silly ghost story. Chen never published her research. 3 weeks after her visit to the medical center, she was hospitalized with an unexplained neurological condition that left her unable to speak. She died 6 months later, the cause never definitively determined. But here's where the story takes its most unsettling turn. Since the photograph was digitized and added to the hospital's online historical collection in 2018, there have been 13 reported cases of people who, after viewing it, have experienced the same dream. They describe walking down a long hospital corridor lit by electric lamps with frosted glass shades, a distinctive feature of Cannon Street's original design. At the end of the corridor stands a figure in a nurse's uniform, her back turned to the dreamer. As they approach, she slowly turns, revealing a body that ends abruptly at the neck, a smooth stump where her head should be. In her hands, she holds a leather-bound book, its pages open as if offering it to the dreamer. Before they can see what's written there, they always wake up. The dreams follow a progression, becoming more detailed with each occurrence. Those who experience them report that in subsequent dreams, they get closer to the headless nurse, close enough to see that the book she holds contains names, dozens of them, written in different hands, different inks. Some dreamers report that in later iterations, a second headless figure appears, standing behind the first, an older woman in an outdated uniform. Both figures seem to be waiting for something, expectant in their posture despite having no faces to express their anticipation. 12 of those 13 people have since visited hospitals as patients. 7 never left alive. The remaining 5 report continuing dreams, each one bringing them closer to reading the words in the headless nurse's book. One of them, a graduate student researching medical history, committed suicide last year, leaving behind a note written in handwriting that doesn't match his own. It contained just one sentence: "She wants me to help them remember." What is it they want remembered? The injustice of Margaret's improper burial, certainly. The cover-up of Eleanor's disappearance, perhaps. But Kendrick's note suggests something deeper. Systemic abuses that both women witnessed, medical malpractice that continued from the original sanatorium into Cannon Street Hospital, exploitation of vulnerable patients that the institutions were built to hide rather than heal. They were both witnesses, Kendrick wrote in his final entry. Witnesses who were silenced before they could speak the full truth. Now they seek new witnesses, new voices to tell what they could not. The connections extend beyond Cannon Street itself. Dr. Chen's research uncovered links between the hospital's founding board members and powerful medical and pharmaceutical interests of the era. The experimental treatments performed at the original sanatorium hadn't disappeared with its destruction. They had evolved, continuing at Cannon Street under different names, funded by the same interests. Chairman Blackwood's family had made their fortune in patent medicines, many of which were later proven to contain dangerous or addictive substances. The hospital's East Wing, where terminal patients were housed, served as an ideal testing ground for treatments too risky to be documented officially. These practices didn't end with the deaths of the original perpetrators. The modern medical center built on Cannon Street's foundations has faced multiple ethics investigations in recent decades, though none have resulted in significant consequences. In 2015, a whistleblower case involving experimental pain management techniques was quietly settled out of court, records sealed. The physician who brought the complaint subsequently died in a car accident ruled to be caused by brake failure, a strange echo of the past that few would connect to events from over a century earlier. Which brings us to you, looking at this photograph now. You may tell yourself it's merely an interesting historical anomaly, a damaged image with a colorful urban legend attached to it. That would be the rational explanation. But consider this. In the original photograph preserved in Kendrick's papers, Eleanor Harwick stood in the back row, third from the right. In the digital copy created in 2018, she appears in the same position, but in the version you're looking at right now, count the figures in the back row. Check their positions. Notice anyone missing? Now look at your screen's reflection, at the space just behind where you're sitting. Is that a shadow moving, or something more substantial? Do you feel the sudden chill in the room, that sensation of being watched? The reflective properties of screens create interesting visual effects. In low light, they can act almost like mirrors, showing not just what they display, but what stands behind the viewer. Many who have studied the Cannon Street photograph report seeing something in this reflection that shouldn't be there, a dim figure standing behind them, only visible in the screen's dark areas. A figure wearing what appears to be a nurse's uniform. Some claim to have captured this reflection in screenshots, though the images are always too blurry, too ambiguous to be conclusive. Just pareidolia, the mind's tendency to see familiar patterns in random visual noise. Just a trick of light and shadow, easily explained away. Unless, of course, it isn't. Those who've reported these reflections describe another common experience, the sensation of gentle pressure on their shoulders, as if someone were standing behind them, hands resting lightly on their upper back. Not threatening, not aggressive, but insistent, present. The pressure typically lasts only seconds before dissipating, leaving behind a lingering cold spot that gradually warms back to room temperature. Scientists would explain this as a combination of suggestion and heightened awareness of normal bodily sensations. The power of storytelling to make us more attentive to the ordinary physical experiences we usually filter out. A rational explanation that satisfies most people. Most, but not all. She doesn't want to harm you. Eleanor just wants you to help them remember what happened at Cannon Street Hospital. She's been waiting for someone to finally hear her story. And now that you know the truth, you're part of it too. The next time you find yourself walking down a long corridor, pay attention to the footsteps you hear behind you. They might be your own echo, or they might be Eleanor, following you as she once followed Margaret, drawn to those who know her story, compelled to make them understand that some truths refuse to stay buried, some photographs refuse to be burned, and some nurses refuse to disappear, even without their heads. The pattern of haunting has remained consistent through decades of reports. It begins with dreams, walking down that same corridor, approaching the headless figure with her outstretched book. Then come the physical sensations, cold spots, the feeling of being watched, gentle pressure on shoulders or arms. Finally, for those who continue engaging with the story, the manifestations become more tangible. Objects moved when no one is looking, whispered voices just at the edge of hearing, and glimpses of uniformed figures and reflective surfaces. The progression never varies, as if following a protocol, a procedure as methodical as a nurse's rounds. What's particularly striking in modern accounts is the technological component. Those who have shared the photograph electronically report unusual device behavior, batteries draining unexpectedly, screens flickering, and in several documented cases, text messages or emails sent from their accounts that they have no memory of writing. The messages typically contain fragments of medical terminology from the late 19th century, references to patient care protocols long obsolete, or most frequently the phrase, "remember us," repeated with slight variations. Equipment malfunctions are especially common in medical settings. Heart monitors displaying impossible readings, medication pumps administering precise dosages despite being unplugged, CT scanners producing images with unexplained artifacts that resemble a woman's silhouette. Skeptics attribute these phenomena to the power of suggestion combined with the natural glitchiness of electronic devices. Believers see them as modern manifestations of the same energy that once moved objects in Eleanor's carefully documented experiments. Either way, the consistency of reports across decades, from witnesses with no knowledge of each other's experiences, suggests something more complex than simple urban legend or internet folklore. There is a pattern here, a methodology to these hauntings, that mirrors the methodical nature of nursing itself: systematic, patient-centered, and persistent. Tonight, when you close your eyes, she'll be waiting for you at the end of that corridor, her diary held open in her pale hands. This time, perhaps, you'll get close enough to read what's written on those pages. The final truth that Eleanor discovered, the secret that cost her her head but couldn't silence her completely, the knowledge that's been waiting for you since the moment you first looked at this photograph and became part of its history. The dreams always begin the same way. You find yourself standing at one end of a long hospital corridor, recognizable by its distinctive architectural elements: arched doorways, transom windows above each room, electric lamps with frosted glass shades. The floor beneath your feet is polished tile in a geometric pattern popular in the late Victorian era. The air carries the faint scent of carbolic acid, the antiseptic of choice before modern disinfectants. These details remain consistent across all reported dreams, suggesting not just shared imagery, but a specific, recreated environment. Cannon Street Hospital's East Wing, preserved in perfect detail within the collective unconscious of those who encounter its story. At the far end of this corridor stands a figure in a nurse's uniform, high-necked, ankle-length, with the distinctive cap and apron of late 19th century nursing attire. Her back is always turned initially, her posture perfect, hands clasped before her. As you approach, your footsteps echoing on the tile, she remains motionless until you're almost close enough to touch her. Then she turns, revealing the smooth absence where her head should be. There is no gore, no trauma, simply a precise void, as cleanly cut as in the photograph that started your journey into this mystery. In her hands, she holds a leather-bound book, Eleanor's diary in some dreams, Margaret's journal in others, or sometimes a hospital record book filled with names. The pages lie open, text visible, but somehow just beyond your ability to focus on the words. If you reach for it, as many dreamers report doing, the scene begins to fade, darkness encroaching from the edges of your vision. You always wake before your fingers make contact with the paper. But with each subsequent dream, you get closer, the words becoming slightly clearer, as if Eleanor is gradually deciding to trust you with her truth. Those who have progressed furthest in this dream sequence report that eventually a second figure appears, standing behind Eleanor, dressed in an older style of uniform. Margaret Schaefer, presumably also without a head, her hands resting on Eleanor's shoulders in a gesture of support or guidance. In these advanced iterations of the dream, both figures sometimes turn together to point toward room 11, the door slightly ajar, a faint light spilling from within. No dreamer has yet reported entering that room. What waits inside remains Eleanor and Margaret's final secret, the core truth they have been trying to communicate for more than a century. Sleep well. And if you happen to dream of hospitals, of long corridors and electric lamps with frosted glass shades, remember that Eleanor is counting on you now. She needs you to help them remember, all of them. Just as you'll never be able to forget her, standing in formation with the other nurses, perfectly composed and properly postured, her uniform immaculate, her hands folded neatly in front of her, a model healthcare professional in every respect, except for the empty space where her head should be. The most recent development in this ongoing mystery occurred just last month, when a nursing student at the University Medical Center built on Cannon Street's foundations discovered something unusual during renovation work in the basement level. Behind a section of drywall being removed to access old plumbing, workers found a small recess containing a single object, a tarnished nurse's pin, identical to the one described in Kendrick's notes as belonging to Margaret Schaefer. The pin was turned over to the hospital's Historical Society, where preliminary analysis confirmed its age as consistent with the late 19th century. The student who found it reported experiencing vivid dreams that night, walking down a corridor toward two headless nurses. Unlike previous dreamers, she claims to have finally reached them, to have taken the book from their hands and read a single page before waking. She refuses to disclose what she read, saying only that some truths are meant to be discovered, not told. She has since changed her major from nursing to medical history and ethics, with a focus on patient advocacy. Is this evidence of anything supernatural? Or simply an interesting historical artifact with a compelling story attached, influencing an impressionable student? The rational explanation is always available for those who prefer it. But rationality has its limits when confronting the fuller spectrum of human experience. What remains undeniable is the persistence of this story, its refusal to disappear despite multiple attempts to erase it from history. Like Eleanor and Margaret themselves, the truth of Cannon Street Hospital continues to emerge from the walls that tried to contain it, headless but not voiceless, determined to be acknowledged. And if you wake suddenly in the night, feeling fingers brushing gently against your throat, don't be alarmed.